So first up, we have Ty Ortiz from our CDOT team. He's our Geo-Hazards program manager. He's been with CDOT since 2001. Before that, he worked 10 years with USGS. I have a couple bullet points for Ty. One of his most challenging projects that he worked on was a rock slope near Georgetown with a rockfall source located over 1,500 feet above the interstate. The mitigation strategy involved attenuating the rocks rather than stopping them. The project yielded the development of a new attenuator system, which has been used in several states and has been a topic of interest in Switzerland and Japan. Ty's worked to develop our performance risk-based management plan for the geological and geotechnical hazards that affect our Colorado highways. He's also the chair of the Transportation Research Board Standing Committee on the Engineering Geology. He is also the CDOT proclaimed Geohazards dude. So next up, we have the Managing Geohazards on a Network Scale utilizing a risk-based approach by Ty Ortiz.
Good morning, everybody, by the way. CDOT years ago, I think 1996 is when it started off with a rockfall program only. And it was just rockfall, right? Debris flows, landslide, that's not us, that's somebody else, that's somebody else's money. And we did that for a long time, and we started off with a top-down approach, as most DOTs with rockfall have rockfall hazard rating systems, and they use those systems to kind of allocate resources and kind of go a top-down approach for sure. And we were pretty happy to do that for 20 years-ish or so, maybe not quite 20 years. And it kind of got to a point where we thought, well, geez, we're mitigating this one particular rockfall area, and it may be like 500 feet or so, even 1,000 feet. But we're in these canyons that might be 5 miles long, 13 miles long, 10 miles long. So we really hadn't reduced the risk to anybody, certainly bridges for sure. Not that we have a lot of rocks falling on bridges, but it seemed more reasonable to take a bigger approach. So we decided to go down the road of being kind of more inclusive of all geohazards. And so now all of those mostly slope and gravity driven hazards that affect the highway are what our program concerns itself with. And so what I would like to start off with is just a really short introduction of what an actual geohazard is and some of those geohazards that our program concerns itself with. So we have one of them. Not a lot of sinkholes in Colorado. Most of those are associated with mines. This particular one was associated with a railroad tunnel. This is up on Highway 24 on Tennessee Pass. So sinkholes, right? US 24, sinkhole monitoring that. Debris flows are always an issue, especially post-fire debris flows. Those cause the biggest problems that we have, and those are things where I think this particular group can come into play with post-fire debris flows. Landslides, those are always kind of a bummer. I don't know, you could see the issue here. There's the scarp of the landslide. Embankment failures, I didn't highlight this very well because I was pretty much thinking you'd all see what the issue was. Those are always a problem. Embankment failures and shallow landslides often go hand in hand. This is Highway 13 up around the Rifle area. Rockslides, those can be an issue. That's kind of a bummer. These two guys, this is in Clear Creek Canyon several years ago. These guys were pretty fortunate, or everyone was fortunate in that these were not passenger vehicles. You know, shove these two trucks off the side of the road. And as the story goes, these guys are out of a gravel pit not too far from here. And one of these trucks saw this thing coming and were actually able to radio to the other guys. So they both kind of started shoving themselves over off the road, and they were just fortunate enough to get out of the way of this thing. This ended up being the longest road closure in CDOT history. It was 2.5 months of Clear Creek Canyon, which isn't such a big deal. Well, almost the longest closure. Prior to floods, it was the longest closure in CDOT history. It was 2.5 months of complete closure of Clear Creek Canyon through that area. So Rockslides, a lot of road closures associated with those. Rockfalls are always an issue for us for sure. I spent a lot of time doing rockfall, and that's pretty much the specialty that I have. Often rockfalls are kind of nuisance issues, like this is kind of a property damage only nuisance issue. It's, it doesn't take much to clean up the road off of here, get the rock off the highway and release traffic again. But, it's not always a nuisance issue for sure. Sometimes they're a problem. So this is, when you park somewhere, it's good to look up first, especially in the mountains. The story behind this is that this guy was from out of town. And weekends, nights, and holidays, like emergencies only happen weekends, nights, and holidays, it seems. He was out rock climbing in Clear Creek Canyon. And when he came back from rock climbing, he saw our folks over there with a tow truck, the state patrol, our CDOT guys, and he was a little upset because he thought he was getting his car towed from being illegally parked. And he wasn't. And it was a rental, by the way. So that was a bit of a bummer. So why am I here in the Bridge conference? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, perhaps. I blame Mike, mostly. Mike Collins. Mike, this Mike right there, thank you. So I think one of the things is to promote geohazard awareness, right? So those are the geohazards that we work on. And I think those kind of come into our everyday lives, whether you're a bridge person or just a person driving into the mountains for recreational, right? I think it's good to promote that and be aware of these things. When it's raining, you'll understand that there's rockfall issues. Look up. Most of the time that we have rock vehicle interactions, it's because people drive into the rocks. It's pretty rare that you have that video of a rock falling onto a car. Another reason here for being here is that maybe there is a little bit of bridge and rockfall geohazard interaction, and we could look at some examples of that. And then also I think that might maybe pair a little bit with what Heather's going to talk about in terms of maybe a different way to think about asset management as well. How do these different bridges and rockfalls and culverts and walls, how do those things all relate to each other? And it's just maybe a different way to look at asset management rather than condition-based. Perhaps you can look at it as risk-based. But first, just a few examples of how rockfall, rockslides have affected Colorado bridges over the years. In 2004, weekends, nights, and holidays for sure, we had a pretty large rock slide in Glenwood Canyon. And this is, my wife and I at the time, we were expecting a lot of people for Thanksgiving dinner. And honest to God, we were literally putting turkeys in the oven, and the phone rings and said, hey, there's a rock slide in Glenwood Canyon. Why don't you come out? I was like, no, I don't want to. And they said, well, we weren't asking. So off we went. But just to give you kind of a feel for where this slide happened, right? There's the source, the arrow there points to the source area. It's 1,000-ish feet vertical, roughly 1,500 feet slope distance, maybe a little less than that, to that particular source area. Our operations cameras caught the slide in action. The road, we were lucky. Westbound, this is a CDOT tow truck coming. Westbound lanes were closed. There was an accident that had just occurred. Eastbound lanes were open. And you'll see these trucks coming through here. And you'll know right when the slide happens. This is all bridge, well, partly bridge, partly wall through this particular area. You'll see the slide happen. Pay attention to the 9 area here. You'll see the slide when the cameras pan. And so that was the slide caught in action. And from the road over to where the railroad is, that's about 300 feet. This guy backs up, which is what the heck, what else are you going to do? And with really good reason, if you just saw this happen in front of you. So it's a good example of, a bridge underneath the rockslide area. All right, pretty good boulders. Ended up being, these ended up being somewhat costly. Not so much that the bridge repair is costly, but all of those other indirect costs of the road being closed. And we had one slide. It wasn't this, I think it was this particular one, right? It was 2004, it's a holiday, and this should be a crime, right? All of a sudden, an airline ticket from Grand Junction to Denver went up to $1,000 that particular weekend. So that's just doesn't seem quite right to me. So this is the biggest hole, at least on that the biggest hole in the bridge from that particular slide happened. 2010, a very similar rock slide happened at, for all intents and purposes, the same location. And this is some of Kane's folks drilling and popping this rock over here. Same thing. This is maybe 50 feet away where this particular hole is on the bridge. You'd think we'd learned something by now, right? And so at this particular point, Matt Greer, I thought I saw Matt Greer over here somewhere. Anyway, Matt said, there's Matt. I'm going to pick on Matt for a second. So Matt takes us aside and said, stop putting holes in our bridge. Don't do that anymore. So we went into a feasibility study. I'm, the way EER funding works, we called it a structural selection study. What could we do to kind of mitigate this particular bridge? And one of the concepts that we've come up with, and we're kind of following through with some constructability, feasibility of this particular option, is to construct a rock shed. Now this would be, a rock shed on a big scale for sure. Rock sheds are kind of, the structure itself, rocks would come down, they would land on a very cushioned roof of this particular structure, hopefully keep those rocks from getting onto the road. With any luck, they don't go through this particular structure and onto the road. A lot of other things associated with it, but those are some things that could probably be looked into at least. Recently, 2016, last year, this happened weekends, nights, and holidays, February 15th, I think it was President's Day or something like that, in which it occurred. Rockslide occurred, Glenwood Canyon again. The theme here is that if you're a bridge on Glenwood Canyon, you're probably going to get hit by a rock. So it's, most of them happen right in that particular area because it's like 13 miles of canyon directly below really steep, geologically speaking, young canyon area. Nobody hurt in this particular incident. Source area, roughly 900, I think this is only about 700 feet vertically above the road. Example of some of the damage caused by that particular slide. Certainly not as bad, but one of the things that happens with some of these slides is that we end up doing a lot of mitigation. Some of that mitigation is rock scaling. So we ended up with several little holes like this in this kind of parapet wall area. These post-tensioned or pre-stressed strands here that we caused, and part of that was because of the mitigations, just try to make that slope a little more safe for people to drive underneath it. I'm not exactly sure how you go about protecting a bridge from something like this, but maybe you guys are way smarter than me. I'm this much smarter than a rock. Could figure something out when it comes to things like that. But there are things that I think that you can think about in terms of how you might design a bridge, where you might locate a bridge, or any particular structure, right? How do these things all really work together? The mitigation option for us, at least, and this was to build a Rockfall Fence. This was, and actually this is the first Rockfall Fence of its capacity in the U.S. Rockfall fences are typically not designed or they're manufactured in the U.S. because of Buy America requirements. They're not designed in the U.S. This is a Swiss company that designed this particular fence. It's a 5,000 kilojoule fence, if that means anything to anybody, but that's roughly a loaded semi cruising down the road at roughly 80-ish miles an hour or so. So it would stop that particular size of a rock coming at that energy level. Other areas where we have had bridge issues and rockfall issues, Red Cliff Arch Bridge, all the CDOT guys I suspect know about this particular thing. There was some bridge maintenance going on over here. The bridge inspectors looked at this and said, hey, maybe there's a rockfall issue there. And we went over there and said, hey, you're probably right. So we draped some netting over here, but just kind of examples of how some of these geological hazards can affect structures that a group like this is involved in the design or construction of, or inspection of, or preservation of. This is a great video that I couldn't get to work, but if you did see it, it's really fun. In 2013, going back to post-fire debris flows, pretty large fire in Waldo Canyon, very destructive. A lot of houses were destroyed in the Colorado Springs area. There was a culvert that plugged up as part of a rain event that happened a couple of years later. That culvert plugged up and it sent gushes of trees and rock and water and mud flowing down Interstate 24. There was even a fatality involved with that. One of the solutions was, well, let's get rid of that culvert and put in a concrete CBC, right? You guys would know better than me. I don't know if this is treated as something that is inspected by our bridge crew or not, but a little thing like this, right? We have a large drainage area, and at the time we just had a smaller culvert that perhaps didn't have the capacity to deal with the amount of material you would have in a post-fire debris flow, at least. So how do all these things affect our ability to get from one place to another, right? A different way to, this, by the way, is a friend of one of the people in our office, right? This just as a sidebar, if you ever watch these guys jump, they are like Rocky and Bullwinkle. These guys just fly through the air. It's really kind of fun to watch them. But how do all these things affect our ability to get from one place to another, right? We have bridges, and we have walls, and we have geohazards, which maybe is a hazard that affects assets. We have culverts, right? That debris flow in Waldo Canyon. A larger capacity culvert, maybe we wouldn't have had those issues over there. We have signals and intelligent transportation. All of these things sort of work together to get yourself from point A to point B. And it seems that certainly condition is really important, right? That tells you what bridge, what culvert needs to be fixed, what culvert is under capacity, what bridge deck needs to be worked on. If you look at condition only, though, I mean, the bridge is in good shape, and the striping looks pretty good, and the signs all look pretty good. They tell you where you're at. But somehow you can't get through this road, right? And so how does this all affect each other, right? This isn't the U.S., but this is in Taiwan, where they have a lot of issues like this. But if we had a lot of rain in Colorado, I'm pretty sure we'd be having a lot of these issues, right? We live in a semi-arid climate, and we don't have these sort of things. So a concept for asset management that we've talked about a little bit is maybe a risk-based geohazards management plan. And it doesn't have to be specific to risk-based. It could be risk-based for anybody. And not to take away from a condition asset program, but perhaps a risk-based asset program, and I'll explain that through the geohazards aspect, is that you measure the risk that is associated to your ability to get from point A to point B by the failure of any one of these geohazards, right? That landslide certainly affects your ability to get from point A to point B. And those rockslides in Glenwood Canyon affect your ability to get from point A to point B. So what would you do for them? You can measure the safety, and you can measure that in terms of cost. You can measure every time there's an accident, you could put a cost to that. Every time Kane folks or Kenny Quintana's folks are out cleaning up the road and have it closed just for cleanup, right? That's a mobility delay. There's costs associated with that. There's maintenance to these things. There's fixing the road. There's building fences, building some sort of mitigation. There's increasing the size of the culvert. All of those things have some sort of cost. So you could put a risk cost to all of this. And what we've done within our particular program, at least, is that we've taken this. Mike is working on a very, very similar program with walls and culverts. We've taken the cost, the annual cost, risk cost associated with each one of these particular failures throughout the state, and turned it into a number in which we could hopefully prioritize locations to allocate our small little bundle of resources. And then we'd like to try to incorporate that into CDOT's overarching asset management program. So in other words, we have a bunch of little dots on the map where rockslides have occurred, and where debris flow happens, where landslides have occurred, and all these other geohazards that we talked about. Well, we can take all these little dots on the map, and we could put costs associated with the costs to these, right? And now we know what that cost is associated with all these little dots on the map that had geological hazards. And now we can go in here, and perhaps we can work with Mike, or we can work with the other asset managers to say, hey, maybe we could do some cost sharing. Perhaps the cost to mitigate that rock slope that is 1,000 feet above us is a little bit beyond our program, but maybe some of our funding can go in to the wall program, and you could beef up that wall, or you could beef up that culvert. Or you can do a different design on your bridge, so that we, in Glenwood Canyon perhaps, you span the girders or the piers so that you allow rock to roll right underneath that bridge. God forbid if one of those, now those rocks that hit that bridge in Glenwood Canyon were about 15 feet by 10-ish by 8 or 10 feet, right? Imagine one of those things rolling down and tagging one of those piers. That could cause some serious problems, for sure. So perhaps there's the ability, using this approach, in which people can work together as assets, as a DOT. So the question comes, at least on the geohazard side, well, that all sounds good, but how do you know where to even go, right? Geohazards are somewhat unpredictable, it seems. We don't know where the next one is going to fall, where the next sinkhole is going to happen, where the next debris flow is going to occur. And so some concepts that we've borrowed from the mining industry are slope monitoring issues, or slope monitoring ideas. So you can scan a slope perhaps, and this is a radar scanner that is set up across from Glenwood Canyon at this mile marker 125 area, where we've done some pilots to see, can we get into a place where we can forecast rockfall issues? And perhaps you can. Mining industry does this. So maybe we know that these red areas are moving, right? Maybe with a little more data, you know that red area is just an accumulation of material that has come from above, right? So maybe these areas in here are being deposited down here. So areas up here being deposited down here. Maybe that doesn't mean much. Maybe it doesn't mean much at all. But could this be done on a large scale? Could it be done on a corridor basis? And is there added benefit to it? So could we now take all these individual sites? This is not Glenwood Canyon. This is a site on US 24 and Tennessee Pass. But could we take all of these areas, these corridors that have geohazards in them, scan them, look for change detection, look for displacement, and say, hey, this particular area, this one with the arrow here, right over here, that's the next one. That's the next one that's going to go. Why? Because it's moved 15 inches, and we've already had a rockfall issue right over there. So now we can go to CDOT Bridge folks and say, hey, we think this is going to go. Why don't we look at some ways to maybe increase the capacity of loading on this bridge or impacts on this particular bridge? And I think that there's a lot of value in sharing asset funding if we kind of take that type of approach. So that said, thanks for the time, and I appreciate you having kind of an off-topic presentation. Appreciate it.